Hundreds of pro- and anti-immigration demonstrators have faced off in Glasgow in rival protests over asylum policy. Each side was kept apart by significant police presence as tensions rose.
It's cold. Not just the weather, but the country. Across Britain, this winter has become more than a season. It's a statement, a reckoning, a national verdict on years of economic mismanagement and political indifference. By December 2025, over 8.9 million households are living in fuel poverty. That's not a projection or worst-case estimate. That's the reality. Nearly 1 in 3 households in the UK can no longer afford to keep their homes warm. And with tensions rising across the UK and thousands taking to the streets of London right now, it's more important than ever to see the full picture. If you want to stay updated on the situation as it unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'm covering the angles the mainstream media might miss, like this video if you believe in unfiltered reporting. Thousands of people. The response wasn't just frustration. It was resistance. In the streets of London, over 50,000 people turned out. Marches surged through Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham, Newcastle, 15 cities, each with their own wave of outrage. This wasn't a fringe movement or one-day outburst. This was a coordinated national eruption. The heat or eat protests were born not from political ambition, but from necessity. This movement didn't ask for headlines. It demanded them. It wasn't designed for spectacle. It was built for pressure. And pressure is exactly what it delivered. Because this wasn't just about energy bills. It started there, yes. The steep, unrelenting rise in energy costs, up more than 40% from pre-2021 levels, was a spark. But what followed wasn't a simple protest about price hikes. It was a broader reckoning with a government that had failed to anticipate, failed to prepare, and failed to protect. Wages haven't kept up. Social support hasn't kept up. And now, millions of people are left behind, not because of sudden global shocks, but because of policy decisions made over years. People who did everything right, worked, saved, contributed, are now asking whether they'll have to skip dinner or sleep in the cold. That's what makes the slogan "Heat or Eat" so powerful. It's not an exaggeration. It's a binary choice. And it hit hard because it's happening. Every day, the government tried to respond. When protests first picked up, there was delay, then denial, then, finally, a reluctant reversal. Chancellor Rachel Reeves reinstated winter fuel payments for pensioners. It was meant to calm things down. But by then, it was clear the issue had moved far beyond payments. Because this crisis wasn't just economic anymore. It was political, social, moral. The protests didn't stop. If anything, they deepened. The demand shifted. People weren't only asking for help with bills. They were calling out the entire approach to governance. I know things feel really heavy in the UK right now. There's a lot of division and noise on the streets. But I want this channel to be a place where we can come together. If you want to be part of a supportive community, please subscribe. And like this video to show some love to everyone feeling anxious about the state of things right now. Stay safe out there, everyone. They were asking, how did this happen in the first place? Why did it take millions freezing before anything was done? That's the real question. And the government hasn't answered it. Because this wasn't just a failure of policy. It was a failure of anticipation. A failure to understand how economic stress builds, how trust erodes, and how a population under pressure doesn't just suffer, it organizes. And that's what happened here. This movement didn't rise and fall like so many before it. It didn't flare up for a week, burn bright, and then fade into hashtags. It changed the rhythm of protest itself. What began as public marches turned into something else, a system of constant, calculated pressure. These weren't just explosive gatherings. They were persistent, relentless, week after week, region after region. This wasn't a firework, it was a drumbeat, and it's still going. And that endurance, it mattered. It reshaped political timelines, forced policy discussions, disrupted the default mode of ignoring public outrage until it goes quiet. Because this time, it didn't go quiet. And the government learned, belatedly, that not all protests are meant to escalate. Some are meant to last. The shift was clear. The protest became less about volume and more about longevity. That strategy changed everything. Suddenly, Ministers weren't managing a single crisis. They were being pulled into a slow, grinding confrontation with the consequences of years of reactive politics. Every press briefing, every policy rollout had to be seen through the lens of public skepticism. You've seen the headlines, but the atmosphere down here is completely different. Subscribe so you don't miss the raw footage I'm releasing later this week, and like this video to help push this unfiltered reporting up the algorithm. Because people weren't just cold, they were done. Done with reactive policies. Done with last-minute U-turns. Done with watching leaders scramble after the damage has already been done. So the protests persisted, and they evolved. Unions got involved. Local councils began to coordinate messaging. Community organizations linked arms with national groups. What once looked like scattered frustration turned into an infrastructure of resistance. There was no single ringleader, no dramatic catalyst, just a common thread. This is unsustainable. And it worked, not because it brought immediate change, but because it exposed just how reactive the political system had become. It showed that the government wasn't steering the ship, it was bailing out water while it sank. Every week the protest continued. The message grew louder. This is not about one winter. This is about a long, slow erosion of trust. And the rebuilding process doesn't start with refunds or handouts. It starts with a complete rethinking of how leadership works in a crisis. The problem, of course, is that leadership in this case wasn't absent. It was behind, always late, always reactive, always offering aid when people needed prevention. And that dynamic, too little, too late, became the core of the public's fury. Because it's not just about energy. It's about credibility. People don't just want bills to go down. They want to believe that the next crisis won't sneak up on them while ministers hold press conferences. They want a government that sees around corners, not one that trips over the same ones every year. And that's where things get harder to fix. You can reverse policies. You can adjust payments. But you can't flick a switch and restore trust. Once people believe their leaders are incapable of planning ahead, they stop listening. They stop marching. And they don't stop. That's exactly what's happened. And it's not just about material conditions. It's about messaging. Heat or eat worked because it took a complex, systemic failure and turned it into a human dilemma. It put everything into a binary that everyone understood. And no matter where you stood politically, you knew that something had gone very wrong when that became a choice at all. That framing made it impossible to ignore. And it united people across demographics, across party lines. Everyone could see themselves, or someone they knew, facing that choice. That's what changed the tone of the protests. This wasn't a niche issue. It became a national identity crisis. And still, the government treated it as if it could be managed by PR. But this wasn't about reputation. It was about survival. The failure to address the root causes didn't just hurt people economically. With tensions rising across the UK and thousands taking to the streets of London right now, it's more important than ever to see the full picture. If you want to stay updated on the situation as it unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'm covering the angles the mainstream media might miss, like this video if you believe in unfiltered reporting. It reshaped how they saw politics altogether. Suddenly, protest wasn't just a right, it was a necessity. It wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. And this new protest culture, it's not going anywhere. It proved that the episodic model, spike, outrage, silence, doesn't work anymore. This was a warning that unresolved problems don't disappear. They become routines, embedded in public life, in expectations, in how citizens measure their government's worth. That's a shift we're seeing now, and it's one that will shape the next elections, the next policy cycles, the next wave of movements. Because once people realize that sustained pressure works, once they see that endurance can bend political will, they don't forget it. The heat or eat movement showed that people aren't just tired of being cold, they're tired of being dismissed, tired of waiting, tired of systems that only move under duress. And they're not backing down. So what does that mean for the future? It means that governments will need to stop governing from behind. They'll need to stop treating public anger as a phase and start treating it as a signal. Because this kind of pressure doesn't just go away. It teaches. It sets precedent. It becomes a blueprint for how future movements will build and how future governments will be judged. This wasn't just a protest about energy. It was a blueprint for how broken systems get exposed. And that's the legacy of this winter revolt. Let us know where you stand. What do you think has to change first? How does trust get rebuilt after a crisis like this? We're reading the comments. And if you want to keep following the movements that actually shift power, where public pressure rewrites the rules, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Because this winter didn't just freeze the country. It thawed something else, a new kind of resistance, one that isn't waiting for permission. By now, it's not just a protest, it's a shift in national consciousness. You feel it in the way people speak. There's a new vocabulary, a new cadence to everyday conversations. Fuel poverty, energy justice, living crisis. These aren't academic terms anymore. They are lived realities. They are what people talk about in supermarkets, on buses, at school drop-offs. This crisis has cracked open something that won't be easily closed again. Because once people understand that survival isn't a given in a developed country like Britain, that simply staying warm requires fighting, organizing, and marching, they don't go back to trusting blindly. That's the part Westminster still hasn't grasped. They are treating this like a moment, but to the people living it, this is the new normal. And they are not going to be gaslit into thinking otherwise. Yes, policy reversals happened. Yes, fuel payments for pensioners were reinstated. But even as that policy was announced, thousands were still marching. The message was loud and clear. We're past the point of accepting breadcrumbs. This isn't about temporary relief. It's about long-term betrayal. And here's what's really striking. The protests didn't grow more aggressive. They grew more organized, more consistent. They shifted from outrage to strategy. That's how you know this isn't just another protest cycle. This is something else entirely. In city after city, week after week, people are showing up, not because they think this week's protest will suddenly force sweeping reform, but because they know that not showing up guarantees nothing will change. This movement has taught people that sustained, repetitive pressure works. I know things feel really heavy in the UK right now. There's a lot of division and noise on the streets, but I want this channel to be a place where we can come together. If you want to be part of a supportive community, please subscribe. And like this video to show some love to everyone feeling anxious about the state of things right now. Stay safe out there, everyone. That trust, once broken, doesn't come back just because a minister stands behind a podium and says, "We hear you." Because the truth is, they didn't hear anything until the streets were full, until the stories of freezing homes were front-page news, until reporters started asking how a G7 country let nearly 9 million households fall into fuel poverty. That's the tragedy in all this. The government didn't act because it cared. It acted because it was cornered. And that reactive instinct, it's exactly what people are sick of. People don't want to beg for dignity every winter. They want systems in place that prevent these crises before they spiral. They want leadership that doesn't need protests to see the obvious. They want anticipatory governance, not emergency patches. But instead of building trust, the government let it erode slowly, but steadily, until it cracked. And now they are scrambling to repair something they didn't even notice was broken. Every delayed response, every vague promise, every policy U-turn without accountability only confirmed what protesters already suspected, that their leaders weren't paying attention until it hurt politically. That's why the demand now isn't just lower bills. It's a new standard of leadership. The phrase that keeps coming up is credibility. Because without it, every government action, even well-meaning ones, feels like damage control. And that's what this entire winter has looked like, a government desperately trying to patch over a credibility crisis with checks and sound bites. But credibility isn't bought. It's built. And once it's lost, it's not easily regained. And yet, here we are, tens of thousands still protesting. Not because they enjoy it, but because they realize there's no other way to be heard. They've had to become the pressure that forces progress. And the longer they keep going, the more permanent the lesson becomes. If you want change, you have to outlast a crisis. That's a dangerous truth for any government that prefers passive citizens. But it's also the new reality. And what's even more uncomfortable for the people in power is that these protests haven't burned out. If anything, they become a part of daily life. Like market days, like train delays. You hear announcements about road closures and scheduled marches the same way you hear the weather report. That level of normalization is rare and powerful because it signals a deeper shift. A protest isn't just an event anymore. It's a presence, a pressure point that never quite lets up, that forces politicians to act differently, not just because you've seen the headlines, but the atmosphere down here is completely different. Subscribe so you don't miss the raw footage I'm releasing later this week, and like this video to help push this unfiltered reporting up the algorithm. Fear backlash, but because the backlash never leaves. This is what the Heat or Eat movement represents. A new kind of accountability. One that doesn't wait for permission. One that doesn't need to break windows to be disruptive. One that wins not with noise, but with time. And that's what Westminster still hasn't figured out. They are waiting for the weather to change, for the momentum to slow. But the protesters have made it clear they are not marching for the headlines. They are marching for a different future, and they'll keep marching until they get it, because for too long, the public was told to wait. That help was coming, that things would get better in the next quarter, the next budget, the next reform. But the only thing that came consistently was a cold. So now, people have stopped waiting. They've started organizing, persisting, calling out the cycle of panic and patchwork, refusing to be manipulated by short-term relief. Because when 8.9 million households are living in fuel poverty, it's not just a crisis. It's a collapse of basic support, of planning, of trust. And the people affected, they're not just victims. They are voters, organizers, protesters, and now they're the ones defining the narrative. Not the government, not the press, not the pundits, the people who march in London, the families freezing in Birmingham, the pensioners holding signs in Newcastle. They've taken control of the story, and they're not giving it back. This is what happens when people stop believing in temporary solutions and start demanding structural change. When they realize they've been managing crises the government should have prevented. When they learn that endurance, not outrage, is the most powerful political tool. And now that they've learned that, there's no going back. Because even if bills go down, even if new policies roll out, the memory of how long it took, how hard they had to fight, and how many suffered in silence before anything was done, that doesn't disappear. That stays. It shapes expectations. It informs elections. It teaches a new generation that protest isn't optional. It's essential. And this winter will be remembered not just for the suffering, but for the stand that followed. And now, here we are, deep into the winter of 2025, and Britain is still marching, still freezing, still fighting. This is no longer a story about fuel poverty alone. It's about what happens when people realize that the system meant to protect them has been hollowed out, slowly and quietly, until one day, there's nothing left to rely on but each other. This isn't just a protest anymore. It's a reset. The public has recalibrated its expectations, with tensions rising across the UK and thousands taking to the streets of London right now. It's more important than ever to see the full picture. If you want to stay updated on the situation as it unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'm covering the angles the mainstream media might miss, like this video if you believe in unfiltered reporting. Not downwards, but out of the old frameworks entirely. No one's looking to the next ministerial statement with hope. No one's expecting the next energy bill adjustment to magically solve the crisis. The trust in top-down leadership has fractured, and instead, people have built something else in its place, a bottom-up, endurance-based movement that doesn't need a charismatic leader or a single day of action. It just needs consistency, community, and the willingness to keep showing up. And show up, they have, in cities and towns across the country every week. Candlelight vigils turned into full-scale mobilizations. Protests grew into networks. Marches became meetings. What began as a reaction has become a routine. It's no longer a cry for help. It's a declaration, we're not going anywhere. And this shift, from sporadic outrage to sustained resistance, is what's truly unprecedented here. Because traditional protests rely on momentum, on volume, on visibility. But this movement, it's fueled by something different. Calculation, endurance. People are showing up even when the cameras aren't, even when it's snowing, even when they've already marched the week before. Because the goal isn't to go viral, It's to wear the system down until it responds like it should have in the first place. And it's working. You can see it in the way the government has started to stutter, to hesitate, to scramble for language that sounds like leadership but feels like delay. Policy reversals are announced with a tone of reluctant admissions. The restored pension fuel payments weren't celebrated. They were scrutinized. Because everyone knows that's not the full picture. It's a start, but it's not enough. Not when the core issue remains untouched. Because yes, energy costs are devastating right now, but they're also a symptom. The real sickness? A long-term failure to build economic policies that protect people before the cold sets in. This winter didn't sneak up on anyone. The conditions of this revolt were laid out in plain sight. Rising bills, stagnant wages, weak safety nets. Everyone saw it coming. Everyone felt it coming. Everyone said it was coming. Except the government, apparently. And now, they're in reaction mode. Not leadership mode. Not strategy mode. Just damage control. But damage control doesn't work when the public has already moved on from anger to determination. That's why the protests have lasted. Because people aren't just marching against the cold. They're marching against the idea that this was ever acceptable in the first place. And that's where the government has lost the plot. Because even as they fumble for solutions, the public has stopped waiting. They've taken ownership of the issue. They are not just marching, they're educating, organizing, building mutual aid, holding forums, setting up community heat banks. They are doing the job of the state while being ignored by it. That's not activism. That's survival. And that level of grassroots resilience, it's what makes this different from anything we've seen in recent years. This isn't about a single law or a single policy reversal. It's about resetting the social contract, the unwritten agreement that says, we wake, we pay in, and in return, the government ensures that we're not left to freeze in the dark. That contract? Shattered. And you can't repair a broken contract with a single payment, or a speech, or a temporary relief measure. You repair it with consistency, foresight, and structural reform. But most importantly, you repair it by acknowledging why it broke in the first place. The government hasn't done that. Not really. They've acknowledged the crisis, but not their role in causing it. And without that accountability, every attempt at a fix feels cosmetic, performative, and people can tell. Because when you've been cold for weeks, physically, emotionally, politically, you stop listening to apologies. You start looking for action. And action is what the public has taken into its own hands. Now, this new protest culture is setting a precedent, a blueprint, one that could influence not just future protest movements, but future political behavior. The old playbook, wait for the outrage to pass, throw out a temporary fix, move on, isn't working anymore. This is something else. It's a warning shot to every government that thinks trust is infinite, that thinks people will endure anything so long as you tell them help is on the way, that assumes silence is compliance. Because what the Heat to Eat movement has shown unequivocally is that when trust collapses, people don't just get angry, they get organized, and they stay organized, long after the news cycles have moved on, long after the press conferences, long after the budgets are passed. The protests don't just disappear. They transform. They evolve. They take root. This is a part the government still hasn't come to terms with. They are waiting for the frost to thaw, for the movement to tire. But the people protesting aren't here for the season. They are here for the principle. And that principle isn't going anywhere. Because this isn't just about energy bills. It's about credibility. About the belief that the people in charge should be able to protect the most basic aspect of life, warmth, food, shelter. And when they can't do that, or worse, when they won't until forced, then the people will force them. So the marches continue. The pressure builds. And the system is learning, in real time, that performative concern doesn't buy time anymore. Only results do. And those results better come with more than half measures and reactive gestures. Because the public's demands are clear. Long-term affordability, structural change, proactive governance. Not next year. Now. Because next year, people will remember who stood by quietly while they froze. And that memory doesn't go away. It turns into votes, into movements, into a permanent shift in what people expect from those who claim to lead. This is the new reality. not just in the streets, but in the minds of millions. A permanent expectation that the government show up before the next crisis hits. Because now that people know what it takes to be heard, they won't go quiet again. They are marching not because they expect immediate change, but because not marching would be admitting defeat. That's what this movement has become. It's no longer about protesting a bill or chasing a policy reversal. It's about drawing a line, saying, clearly and visibly, this is not normal. This will not be normalized. And if those in power won't take responsibility, the people will hold that line themselves. Week after week, in the cold, in the rain, through Christmas, through January, through fatigue and frustration. Because what other choice do they have? This isn't outrage, it's survival. And survival has turned into structure, into strategy, into something the government can't easily dismiss, can't wait out, and definitely can't spin away. Because every time the government fails to deliver something concrete, it only confirms what the protesters already know, that they were never the priority, that this crisis wasn't unforeseen. It was ignored. And now, that failure has a face. It's on banners, in chants, in hashtags. But most of all, it's walking down the streets of every major UK city. The people marching aren't political radicals or career activists. They are workers, grandparents, teachers, nurses, tenants, caregivers. Some have never attended a protest in their lives. But fuel poverty changed that. Being cold changes your outlook. Watching your children sleep under 2 coats and a blanket changes your tolerance. And the government, still reacting like this is some temporary outburst. But it's not. What we're seeing now is the slow, grinding momentum of a society that's realized no one's coming to save them. That if change is going to happen, it'll come from below, not from press briefings or carefully worded apologies. That realization, it changes people. And that change, it's irreversible. The core of the issue isn't just energy pricing. It's the hollowing out of public trust. It's the realization that when it mattered most, the safety net wasn't there. The government didn't move until it was cornered. And even then, it offered the bare minimum, late and limited. So the demands have shifted. They are not about temporary relief anymore. They are about systemic repair, about credibility, about making sure this never happens again. And that's a much taller order, one that can't be met with one-off payments or media statements, one that requires real governance, not damage control. Because when the public stops believing that the people in charge are capable of protecting them from something as basic as cold, it doesn't just shake political trust, it erodes a foundation of social cohesion. And right now, that foundation is crumbling. People are no longer looking to Downing Street for answers. They are looking to each other. Mutual aid groups, community heating hubs, protest networks. That's where real support is coming from. Not from the top, but from the bottom. From neighbors, from solidarity, from necessity. And while that resilience is powerful, it also reveals something devastating. The quiet collapse of the state's responsibility to its people. Because the truth is, no one should have to organize to stay warm. That shouldn't be a grassroots responsibility. It should be a given. And the fact that it isn't, that's a scandal. But here's what's different now. People aren't just angry. They're organized. They've stopped relying on the promise that next winter will be better. They are holding leaders accountable now. They are forcing uncomfortable conversations. And they are doing it without waiting for a televised debate or a policy white paper. Because while the government debates terminology, people are shivering. While MPs argue over optics, families are turning off radiators and boiling kettles just to feel some warmth in their kitchens. And every time that contrast is made visible, every time the public sees a minister say, "We're taking action," while nothing changes in their homes, it deepens a divide. This is where the crisis becomes a turning point, where public perception hardens, where frustration transforms into expectation, not for charity, but for change. Because once you've been through a winter like this, you don't just forgive and forget when spring arrives. You remember. You remember which leaders showed up and which ones disappeared. You remember how quickly your needs were deprioritized. You remember how loud you had to be just to get a response. And you carry that memory into the ballot box, into the next march, into the next public meeting. Because it's not just about bills anymore. It's about never going through this again. That's what the government doesn't seem to understand. That this isn't just a cold spell, it's a political climate shift. And it's not going away. Because even if fuel prices drop, even if subsidies increase, even if the government rolls out a new plan next month, it won't undo the betrayal people felt when they were told, essentially, to wait, to cope, to manage. That betrayal sticks. It lingers. It shapes expectations going forward. And now that people have learned how to organize on this scale, that knowledge isn't disappearing. The Heat or Eat movement has laid down a blueprint for modern protest, sustained, strategic, coordinated, and emotionally grounded, not driven by chaos, but by clarity. It's not about making noise, it's about making change. And that kind of protest, it's harder to silence, because it doesn't come and go. It settles in. It adapts. It learns. That's what the government is dealing with now. Not a single protest, but a cultural shift. One that says, we don't trust you to protect us anymore, so we'll protect ourselves. And we'll hold you accountable until you prove otherwise. That's the message walking through the streets every week. That's what ministers hear when they see another headline about another march. That's what voters are thinking when they listen to the next empty statement about affordability or resilience. And unless that message is met with action, real, structural, long-term action, this movement isn't going anywhere. Because at its core, this isn't about energy. It's about respect, about dignity, about refusing to accept that freezing in your own home is just another side effect of a difficult winter. It's about saying, you let this happen. Now fix it. And honestly, how could it be done? Nothing's been solved. The government is still treating this like a PR problem, like a temporary hiccup that just needs a good press cycle and a few technical tweaks. But the protesters aren't confused. They know the difference between being heard and being handled. And what they're being given right now, it's handling. You can't unfreeze people's homes with rhetoric. You can't restore trust with one policy reversal. The message has been made painfully clear. This crisis wasn't just a winter emergency. It was the exposure of something much older, much deeper. Years of underinvestment. Years of ignoring the compounding effect of wage stagnation and rising costs. Years of reacting to emergencies instead of preparing for them. That's why people keep showing up. Because they figured out that waiting quietly doesn't work. And when a protest movement outlasts a news cycle, outpaces political spin, and builds actual community in the process, it stops being a protest. It becomes a reckoning. And let's be honest, no one's marching in December, in sleet and wind, just to make a point. They are marching because this is the only tool they have left. Because when the heat goes off, and the bills come in, and your government tells you to hang tight, what else do? You put on your coat. You hit the streets. You hold up a sign that says, I can't afford heat, and you walk with 50,000 others who know exactly what that feels like. And they'll keep walking. Because winter might end, but the damage doesn't. People will remember the sleepless nights, the breath in the air indoors, the rationed meals, the space heaters running on borrowed credit. They'll remember the headlines, the shrugs, the empty promises. The government can't afford to treat this like a seasonal problem. Because it isn't. It's structural, it's cultural, and it's political. And if they think this movement will disappear once the temperatures rise, they've already lost. So what's next? That's the question. Will Westminster actually address the root causes? Or will they kick the can down the road again, hoping the pressure dies before the next election? You'll move government. Because the public, they've made theirs. They've marched. They've spoken. They've endured. And now, they're watching. Drop your thoughts in the comments. How are you feeling about how this is all played out? What would real change look like to you? And if you've been following this with us, if you believe this story matters, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Because the heat may go off, but the pressure, that's still rising.